Cool. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Today, we're going to have a good discussion on scaling AI in the real world with AMD. So we have an incredible panel here. We have Arjun Raj, we have Casey and Roman. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we'll have a good conversation. Go ahead, Arjun.
Hi, my name is Arjun Raj. I'm head of computational biology currently at SOMITE. I'm actually also a professor of genetics and bioengineering at the University of Pennsylvania.
Casey.
Hi, Casey, head of US for Upstage AI.
Hi, Roman Hasenbeck, CEO and co-founder of Rambler AI.
Cool. Thank you guys for joining us today. So I think as you're attending reInvent, I think a lot of you probably have heard AI enough number of times, right? So what we want to talk about today is not just AI, but choice in AI, right? And how AMD is bringing choice when you think of AI. I think there's been a obvious euphoria around AI, what the possibilities of AI are, but we also want to see how it actually affects people, how we actually bring it to touch people's lives, right? And so with the incredible panel we have here, we'll start unpacking what they do, how they're bringing AI to life, how they're bringing AI to touch people, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end. So with that, Arjun, you want to tell us a little bit about your work? AI and biology is just fascinating to just imagine, right? It's like it's two ends of the spectrum. I would be like, you either choose one or the other. It's not like you choose both, so you've chosen both. So we'd love to hear your journey and what you plan to do.
Yeah, well, like many journeys, I think the problem finds you maybe some fraction of the time. So, I can say how I came to SOMITE. So I've been a professor, as I was saying, of genetics and bioengineering. My work has really focused around the biology of single cells. So if you want to talk about cells, whether cells have free will, just buy me a drink after. Happy to talk about it. One of the central challenges in biology is for us to understand how to control cells, to tell cells what to do. And this is one of the central missions at SOMITE Therapeutics, is to understand that language. And right now, I would say that through decades of hard biological work, we've figured out sort of like the words, like the tokens, but we don't know how to string together sentences. So if we wanted to tell us, we know kind of like the elemental units, like the signals that we can give to cells, but we don't know how to turn them into instructions that could turn, say, a stem cell into a muscle cell to cure like a muscle wasting disease, or any number of other potential therapeutics that are very hard to do currently. What we're doing at SOMITE is generating, actually in the lab, huge amounts of data, new kinds of data that we think will allow us to now actually build predictive models that allow us to solve that problem of how to control cells with these signals. And we can do that using all these new ML techniques and powered by AMD GPUs.
Nice. We're super excited about that. I mean, I personally have been working with frontier research in that area, especially given AMD's advantage with large memory and high bandwidth memory. We can actually do a lot of the discovery in one system or one GPU, right? And that helps facilitate that progress in the field. Cool. Casey, do you want to give us a little bit on Upstage?
Yeah, of course. Oh, after hearing what Arjun does. Okay, so I think there's a diversity of AI here as well. So we're using AI to help you, help all of us, especially the one who, where we work at every day. There's repetitive, very, brain-numbing workflows. We're deploying AI to automate all of that for enterprises, especially in the financial service industries, healthcare, public sector, where you think about there's a lot of regulations or the legacies that actually prevent you from deploying the newest technology. So the way that we describe ourselves is we do the unsexy work for using AI. So I think this is the
sexy work.
Right. But I think all of us need AI to help us. And I think like with ChatGPT and OpenAI, we've all experienced what is possible once AI is actually understand the context and actually help as a co-pilot or as a companion and help you automate some of the workflows. So that's where we're focused on. And to go one level deeper, what we identified when we started the company 5 years ago, so we started in Korea, and we went around and met with 100 CEOs of Samsung, LG, and Hyundai of the world and asked, what would be one AI use case that you're willing to pay whatever price it is if we can actually fix it for you? And they all came back with the most unsexy answer, and that was the document extraction. And like OCR, the optical character recognition, has been there for a while. It's not a surprise, it's not the newest, but it was very clear that there was a huge limitation. So if anyone is using OCR or have experienced the OCR, what happened is basically it is reading the documents to left and right without understanding the context or the layout of the document. So if you think about, there's a little bit of changes in the layout or a little bit of handwriting involved in the documents, or it's crumbled, it's kind of tilted. It's kind of really throwing you off, and that negates the purpose of automation when you cannot get to 95% or above accuracy. So we focused on that first very specific use case, and we developed our proprietary next generation OCR, as well as our proprietary LLM. And that's where AMD comes in. We're training our proprietary LLM called Solar using AMD GPUs. And once we marry that OCR and LLM, what's possible now is this becomes a template-free extraction. So users can come and say, hey, I want to extract, let's say, name, ID, address. That information is somewhere in this 500-page long document. Can you find that for us? And we can easily fetch those information, identify it, validate it, and extract dynamically for very fast and cost-efficient manner. And that's what we're focusing on right now. But I do believe that once we build that data foundation for enterprises, then we have so much opportunities after that based on the foundation. So we're also looking into more of end-to-end workflow automation, but really, fixing the most unsexy job that is actually comes with a high willingness to pay. That's what we do at Upstage.
Nice. And I think, it may be unsexy, but I call it walking the last mile of AI, because the hype and, all of it is good, but in the end, to go touch people's lives, you got to go do the grunt work, right? You want to automate those things. And I have experienced even rescheduling flights or something, right? I used to dread calling, the travel agent to go through the process, and now it's just I actually didn't even know. I thought I was talking to a person and it got rescheduled, and then I was like, wait, was this just automated? And then, yes, it's like passing the Turing test for grunt work. I think is a huge business opportunity. So it's great that you're doing it and doing it on AMD, right? So that's great to hear. Roman, you want to introduce yourself and Rambler?
Sure. At Rambler, we built an end-to-end platform to train and deploy vision AI agents. Maybe to give you some background, so I spent my entire career on that intersection between the real world and technology. The previous company is now got acquired by Apple, and it was kind of the starting point for ARKit, Apple Vision Pro. I worked at Apple for 6 years, and then I decided to leave because I saw this inflection point where AI needs to develop a granular understanding of the real world, what is going on around us, in order to be able to support us in our day-to-day life, but also in our, at work, when you're working in a manufacturing plant or for industrial processes. So we started Rambler. You can think of it as a system that enables you to collect data in the real world, like literally how someone is performing a task, and then we can fine-tune and train a vision language model on understanding how a task is supposed to be performed, and then we can deploy it into the real world and confirm if tasks were performed according to the standard operating procedure, or if anyone deviated from that. As part of that, like the fundamental technology is essentially video understanding on a granular level, and we build kind of the end-to-end system for that and are agnostic with regards to the hardware.
Fascinating. I mean, it's great to see that we're talking about like physical AI and vision language models, document extraction, and like biology and AI, all like in one time frame, right? Like each one of these can be like like life-changing and altering for entire generations of people. So so this is great. So how do you? Let's start with. I know. Roman, you'll have to scoot for a flight at some point. So whenever you want to leave, just raise your hand. Like you can.
Well, it depends on the questions you ask me.
Yeah, if you have any questions for him, catch him on the way out. But it'll be great. Let's just start with Casey. Maybe enterprise AI, right? Like enterprise is just huge. What are trends that you're seeing in terms of AI infrastructure? And there's always people always think they're GPU poor, right? So or you always need more GPUs or compute. And given that you have like that touch point with enterprises, how do you see the world, and what do you see from your customers?
Yeah, love this question. I think it actually, I want to fast forward to actually like look back when this whole generative AI was the big shock like last year. A lot of enterprises customer came to us and say, hey, what is it's 2 years ago, and then they start doing POC, and they're like, what is this enterprise AI, generative AI, how do I get started? And back then, the answer was, okay, there is an OpenAI, there's an Anthropic, huge, massive model. You can't really take it onto your own premise or your own cloud environment. So the only way to tap into this new technology was actually leveraging really high compute GPU in a major cloud provider like AWS. And it was amazing. Some of the POC went well, but I think there were various reports that came out, like namely the MIT report that came out like summer this year, that like 90-something% of the POC for enterprise didn't get to the production. And I think I think we've seen the fair amount of those cases as well, and really that came down to ROI. Like, okay, this is great, it works great. How much is it again? And then that's where like the conversation gets stuck. And that's where, going back to your question on infrastructure, and the software, the AI, the model side also, all in the same time in parallel, improved a lot to the point that for the tedious workflow that enterprises are trying to achieve using AI, you don't need this massive frontier model. You can actually achieve this using much, much smaller model that can actually fit on CPU, not even GPU. And that's where the conversation kind of turned with our customers that like, for us, for document extraction, we have an OCR model that is like not even 1 billion in parameter size. And then our model, LLM, is like 17 billion parameter. It nicely fit on a single GPU. And then you can achieve the same level of accuracy, same level of performance. And with the hardware cost that is 1/10, this is a no-brainer. And this is a case where you can actually productize. So I think like within a year, we've noticed that this conversation just rapidly changed from POC to actual production ROI. And now, a lot of enterprises do the POC, understand the use case, test the capability, look for a smaller model that they can deploy a lot more efficiently on a smaller set of GPU or even CPU, and then deploy it and then actually get onto multiple use cases like this. And that way, they can achieve a lot more efficiency in terms of the hardware cost as well as the software cost as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And also the hardware evolution, like for example, what we see with AMD, right? Like we have a pervasive AI hardware story. So even on our laptops, like the laptop I carry around is a Ryzen Max 395. It's like 128 gigs of HBM, not HBM, 128 gigs of RAM. Can run like a GPT OSS 120B,
Wow.
fully, right? So and that's on a laptop. So it'll be interesting to see as your models kind of get to the edge, how it enables that intelligence at the edge.
Right.
But even though it starts from infrastructure that's built on MI300, et cetera. Arjun, on the biology plus AI front, right? Like I'm fascinated as to like when did you it's like because you're coming from the biology side of things, you're like suddenly you find a tool. It's like you found a hammer and you've had all these nails, and now you're like, oh great, I can actually do this, right? Like, can you walk us through when did you like become a believer in like, okay, this is a hammer and here are the nails that I got to go, hit on?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, for me, I had the sort of personally like a ChatGPT moment where I was like, wow, this is really changing things. So that was obviously one major inflection point for me personally. But then just in the field in general of biology, I would say for the last, honestly, 20, 30 years, a lot of it has gotten stuck. It's hit a complexity barrier where I think human understanding, there's massive investment in trying to understand how biology works. And there were a lot of sort of very linear stories that people had developed in science, like, this causes this, causes this. And basically around sort of, the year 2000 or a little before that, maybe even starting before that, we just started to hit this complexity wall where it was like, A depends on, A1 through A200 depends on B1 through B2000, like that kind of thing. So, there were so many problems that we've been sort of mired and stuck with. And now those are starting to be solved by machine learning, which is really remarkable. I mean, we can now build predictive models that could tell us how a particular sequence of DNA might affect how some biomolecule worked. And in principle, all of this was all there, but we just couldn't pull out the meaning from it or pull out the predictive power, at least, let's say, right? And AlphaFold was one huge moment for where do atoms line up to form molecules? I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. And I think, SOMITE is posed to do interesting things. I think that'll be just one of many, huge changes that we're going to see in the coming decade, let's say.
Nice. That's exciting. And Roman, on the vision language models, right? Vision is just, it's the amount of data is infinite. Like you're looking, like I can look at this room in 10 different ways and I can process audio-visual signals in different ways, like how the brain does it. And you're trying to make sense of that and make it accessible to machine learning models and also reason with that, right? That's just that's another step function. Just like on the biology side, you're just taking the physical world into a consumable form. So when did that click for you, and how you're like, okay, now this is the way forward?
Yeah, this is it's a good question because when we started Rambler in 2021, there were no vision language models. Like we've been going through development cycles and research cycles. I've never experienced anything even remotely like that. And now we are at a stage where literally with a relatively small model, 7 billion parameters that you can run on an edge device, you can actually extract granular details from how humans interact with the world, how robots interact with the world. It's I can't really pinpoint it what that wow moment was where I was like, oh my god, this is like we are heading into a future that we don't really understand how systems that understand our world can actually start supporting us, helping us, and not just during work hours, but also throughout our day-to-day lives, right? Like if you think of the next generation consumer devices, we see kind of the first adoption with the Meta Ray-Ban 3 and Meta Ray-Ban 3 display, and now pretty much every consumer electronics provider is coming out with a new device. We're also seeing a lot more cameras deployed out there, right? But like these systems, they need to be able to support you throughout your day-to-day, which means it's a very heavy workload, like processing frames. Unfortunately, we can't fit it on just CPU. That requires pretty powerful GPUs out there. And I'm really excited about the future and what it's bringing. And companies like AMD have really unlocked that space. Also, bringing physical AI really into the real world where it matters. And I'm very excited about that.
I think that was one of the reasons why, like when AMD was designing the hardware, specifications for like what to go after, capacity and bandwidth are huge, right? Obviously, computational flops are important, but we need to be able to consume like data at the scale. So if you look at generation over generation, we've consistently had leadership in terms of 288 gigs of HBM, like a year or two before competition shows up, right? So you can, if you have those ideas on like what to build, AMD definitely has a good hardware footprint. And on the software side too, we want to make it very seamless. So we understand the incumbent ecosystem. So if you've played with it, we want to make sure that the transition to evaluating AMD is zero friction, just like we've done on the CPUs, on the GPUs too, like no code changes. You should be able to run on AMD hardware. So I think this is good. So I want to switch it up a little bit, and let's just see if because we have vision language models, we have enterprise AI, we have biology and AI. Like hypothetically, if we were all brainstorming to start a company, what would we build? Like the four of us. Like I mean, let's say I'm the guy who's going to go sell it. So let's leave me out of the way. I'll give you the compute. What will the three of you want to build, given biology, enterprise, vision language models? I know it's a idea generation question.
I can start.
Yeah.
Well, a real-time world model. That's, I think, this will unlock a lot out there because we're still in that world where, for us to be able to analyze video streams accurately, we need to go through a lot of fine-tuning and training on domain-specific data. There's definitely, foundation models were trained on all of the data that they could get their hands on in the internet, which is not really representative of what you encounter in the real world, usually. So I'm really excited about the opportunity around world models and currently.
Well, but you have to make sure Arjun has something to do, right?
Well, I'm pretty sure biology.
Company, you're like, I'm going to do world models, but what does the biology guy do?
But that's like, a world model by definition should encompass it all, right? It should have a deep understanding of physics.
Maybe
how
it's
the
a world
works.
model where you have a robot that's,
Exactly. Yeah, maybe Arjun, you can take that
let's
idea, and now I throw the ball over to you.
I would be very excited about AI scientists. I think that I was joking with a colleague of mine. Well, maybe joking. He was saying, the university should just be buying fields of warehouse space to put a bunch of AI, scientists to do all the.
Isn't that what the Genesis or something that the Trump?
Yeah,
White House
I think,
announced.
and there are many other, science organizations who are interested in this sort of vision. But I think, the key thing is to really if we want to turn it into a reinforcement learning problem, I think that we need to have robots somehow. I think the state of that is still kind of more here than here. But I think using things like world models obviously would make a huge difference. It would be the potential there is super exciting, and I think also being able to handle also all of the data that's out there in the form of scientific literature and all this knowledge that we spent, hundreds of years, and they're trapped in these ancient, photocopies of a fax of a PDF or something. Being able to extract all of that and use it in some way, I think would be very exciting.
Yeah, that was actually what I was getting to. I'll be the plumber. Because typically, but I think what you touched on earlier is very important. A lot of times, really mission critical information is not in public. It is whether it's a research institution's proprietary reports or it's companies like corporate business knowledge. Those are not searchable online. So a lot of times when we are launching this big, groundbreaking initiatives, it requires tapping into some trivial knowledge that is in the form of documents a lot of time. Whether that's physical document, digital document, doesn't really matter. But because these are proprietary, a lot of time this hasn't been digitized. So we do this a lot with research institutions. We actually did this with one NPO that reports on the carbon emission reports across the globe, and they have years of reports that is extremely complicated, and we just unlocked the entire reports they had it in a depository, and that enabled them to evaluate all the monitoring progress, what are the trends that they haven't been able to monitor when this information was not easily searchable. So I think wherever I go, a plumber is needed everywhere. So happy to collaborate.
All right, I think we're coming up with an idea. So we're going to build a AI scientist robot that is powered by the vision language models to take us through the libraries that can do the OCR, read all the PDFs that you reference, and make biological discoveries. Okay, good. Let's go get some funding.
Any VCs in the audience?
We have
just use AMD.
Yeah.
Just use AMD hardware. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay, that is fun, and I think that is indicative of the transformative effect that AI is having, right? I think of it almost similar to electricity, right? Yeah, we discovered electricity, we lit up a bulb, but now it's oh, I can run a motor, I can power an engine, I can get transportation, there are so many other pieces of it that electricity unlocked. And I think of these core foundational models and LLMs and VLMs also, enabling that level of unlock that we are still at the early stages of trying to understand and reason with. So that's super exciting. So are there places where you think we are not, there are places where you think we should be applying AI and we haven't yet unlocked a whole area of DNA sequencing, or some areas that you think is underrepresented with AI, so that somebody else can go start a company, right? But thoughts on areas underrepresented?
Oh, man, you should start with these guys.
Okay.
I feel like I walked around the hall and I'm pretty much every area is
Every
represented.
area is covered. What do you think, Roman?
Well, I can't really pinpoint a specific vertical because we are still at that stage where, we haven't even, most companies out there are not really using advanced AI in their day-to-day processes. So I feel like we are still at the very beginning of the cycle of adapting AI and figuring out, how it can change the way we do things.
Right.
Hard to tell. I'm passing it on.
Well, I think physical AI is obvious the next hot topic. That one thing that, it's, again, I'm coming from a data and, the foundation point of view. We've collected all these language-based, text-based data across, scrapping entire internet. But for the physical AI, basically, how do we collect the real human interaction data for training a really strong word model or physical model? And I know there are a lot of startups who are doing that at a very early stage, but if one can figure out how to systematically collect these data points, for example, like how a human, sweep the floor when there is a corner that's really hard to get, like robot's not gonna, it's not gonna figure that out, but like, if someone's gonna actually like put a bunch of like stuff on their hand and like, collect that data, like those kind of things, I think there's a big market there and that hasn't been tapped. And I know like we're trying to use the robotics to collect that data. So I think there's a lot of creative thinking going around in the industry, but yeah, overall, I think if we can figure that out, we can build a lot better model because garbage in, garbage out. So I think the data collection side will be the next really hot topic.
Don't look any further.
There you go.
It's always
This
selling.
is at the core of what we are doing.
Exactly.
But that is a very, very good point. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, we had like John Carmack trying out like the Ryzen Max 395, the Strix Halo product for, he has a reinforcement learning based AGI company, which is basically trying to do exactly that. It's like you have a reinforcement learning based method to quickly learn how to get to that corner, right? And then you have a reward system, and there are companies built just to streamline the reward system, right? Like because there's enough data, but when do you know, like just the reward itself is like okay, this is right, this is wrong, right? Or it's trending towards right, trending towards wrong. So there's a lot of that kind of innovation that's ongoing. And I think, reinforcement learning itself is another way that will help us, get to the basics of like how we learn how to walk or talk, right? Is natural phenomena that we haven't yet unlocked in terms of AI. I do think AI, my personal opinion is like, on that same topic, AI will kind of make its way into things that we don't even know is AI. It's like, it's just indistinguishable, and we're just like, oh, wow, now I can do that, right? Like, and then suddenly it's like that, flight rebooking example that I used, and then it unlocks for huge amounts of people that are not necessarily thinking of it as AI, right? Like they're just thinking of it as like something that enhances their life, right? So I think it's incredibly exciting to be at that stage of like revolution. So let's switch gears in terms of just in terms of like actual how your current. We talked about infrastructure. Are there other thoughts in terms of like how do you make it make your companies operate in an AI era? Like what is important for you to be competitive, but at the same time do the research that you have to do, make sure you're targeting a market that's moving so fast. Any thoughts that you want to share just in general about like how you as a company approach that?
I can start. Yeah. So one thing that's, I think I haven't shared this context earlier, but Upstage, our LLM, we are positioning our LLM as a sovereign AI of Korea. So there's a very big like data, like sovereignty concept that is core of our identity. And when we approach AI as really a strong strategic asset that we should be able to control and manage, not just the performance of a single infrastructure provider is good enough. We need to be able to diversify, just like how we're going multi-cloud. Like a lot of enterprises are, tapping into multi-cloud so for the stability of the system. And I think when we approach this AI infrastructure, we're thinking the same, that we're building AI model that our vision is this is going to empower Korea to the next level. And we want to be that AI layer for our economy. then we need to think about how do we make sure that we build that stability in terms of the infrastructure. So, we wanted to make sure AMD is in the mix, all the other GPU providers are in the mix, so all the risks are hedged. And frankly, we initially thought that it will be a difficult transition for us to go from one to another. But I think there has been enough improvement in the system that we can actually easily port over and make sure things are compatible, which our engineers are very happy with when we did a pilot. So for us, when we think about how we make sure we build the most compelling AI layer for the country, we think about the hardware sovereignty, the data sovereignty, and all the training method and the approach that we're taking to make sure that what we build is competitive, but also authentic. So if there's any random variables happened in a macro level, micro level, we're able to hedge the risk.
Nice, and that's great to hear that porting to AMD was seamless, because if it isn't, that's my problem. So let me know. You can email me and be like, Anush, we need this fixed, and we'll make sure it's fixed. But that's great. Arjun, any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, I mean, for us, our team is very diverse. I mean, because we've got software engineers, we have computational biologists, which are, bioinformatics, people who are taking in the raw sequencing data and, turning that into things that we could put into machine learning models. We have a huge experimental team that's, actually making this data. For us, what that means in terms of infrastructure is we need to have infrastructure like AWS and AMD that is very flexible and seamless, so that our resources are stretched thin. We have so many different people doing different things. They need things to just work.
Yep.
And they need to just work out of the box seamlessly, so we're not spending a lot of time handling all of those details, and rather people are focusing on where they have their main sort of competence and talent. So I would say, along those lines, one of the things that's been great about working with AMD is really, we feel like we found a partner, not so much a vendor. Yeah. So we found people that will help us handle those details when they come up, so that, again, we can focus on what we need to do rather than worrying about things that we're not experts in.
No, that's great to hear. I think from an AMD ethos standpoint, right, one of the things that I really enjoy at AMD is that it's an open ecosystem, and it's open source, obviously, right, at a technical level. Going back to your thing on sovereign AI, it can be air-gapped, but every line of code is like, you can build it and you own it, and so you know what's in there. And so it gives you, peace of mind saying, yes, this is ours, and ours as a collective in terms of how we enable you, but then ours as in your deployment, it's your deployment. We want to enable you to do that, and we want you to be able to build on it and have your proprietary IP and your things in a safe environment that you're able to verify and validate without some binary blobs that we can throw around that may not necessarily provide that. But yeah, I think the open ecosystem and the important point of just working is another piece that we take very seriously. And I do like how you put it. We do see everyone as partners, and it's not just hey, buy a GPU and go download something and go do something, right? It's I personally have seen deployments in go from hey, let's have a discussion on how we could do this to in a month or two they're deployed at scale in tens of thousands of GPUs, and it's just working is amazing to see. So it's great to see that. But Roman, don't want you to miss your flight.
No, go for it.
But
so good.
Would love to hear any final thoughts from you. We'll keep them on stage for a little bit longer so that you can peel off whenever you're ready.
No, I think those are all very important points that you guys made. And I guess I want to put one additional focus point on there, and this is kind of, we are at a point where, open data sets become more and more important. And when I say open data sets, I'm not talking about some random research data set. I'm talking about high quality data sets that actually bring the models from where they are today to the next level. Because we are at a point where it's really about domain specificity and understanding environments on a more granular basis. And it's tough, right? Because certainly in the industrial sector, in that data, there's a lot of proprietary information. So there's, of course, not a lot of willingness to share that data with the wider community, but it's starting to stall the progress that we make on these models and the capabilities, the generalization capabilities of these models. So we are at Rambler, we are kind of counteracting that by working on an open source data set, really high quality with regards to the annotations and labels. But of course we are, small fish, right, at the end of the day. So for the community to be willing to start contributing to that pool of data that can be used, and maybe even a little bit outside of just the traditional research community, I think that will be critical to unlock the next generation of these models.
Yeah, I do think good data sets, good open source models also,
correct,
right? That are good baselines, so that you can still build your proprietary like modified version of it that solves a specific use case, right? We want you to have the ability to build on top of it, but at the same time, this gives you a good baseline that is like, oh, this is what GPT-OSS does, right? Or this is what Llama does.
Correct.
And then the data sets that they used for those training, that also makes it powerful, right? So to make it available, with for the open community to innovate and move the ball forward. Cool. So I think what I'd like to kind of like bring the thoughts back, and then we'll have some time for Q&A if folks have Q&A. But I think it's super exciting to have everyone here talk about different parts of AI, right? Like they're almost like before getting on stage, it's like people here may not realize how diverse it is, right? And when you go to the expo floor, it's even like 10x more diverse. But from an AMD standpoint, we want to make sure that you have choice in terms of hardware, you have freedom in terms of the software, and then you have like a partner in terms of the ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So that we want to walk that last mile of AI so that you can then bring value to each of the verticals that you're going after, while we obviously are quarterbacking and would love to see you all succeed in that front. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we want to take it's not a vertically integrated thing to have a combination of like BioNemo for you, or we're not very prescriptive that way. We think of it as an open ecosystem where you should have the tools needed, and the tools we will definitely provide, so that you can do the best work that you can for that. Any last thoughts from you guys before we see if there are any questions? Roman?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think you fulfill a very important role also on the tool side to enable companies out there to focus on building these more domain-specific solutions, and you doing some of the groundwork. I think this is really the enabling factor also for new startups that come out that don't have the manpower, the budget to build
all the tools
around it, all the agent stacks, all the safety security protocols. You can go down the list of things that you need in a large-scale deployment. So thank you for putting in the hard work.
Casey?
Yeah, I think it's related to the earlier point here that I just want to, I know they're not in this room, but shout out to the AMD Ventures team. It was incredible working with the venture side. We had, before, we're still in the process of making it, but when we were very small, when we were just getting started, AMD believed in our vision, supported our vision, and decided to be the partner and sponsor of our journey. And all the technical support, all the leadership support has been just incredible. And anytime AMD's there, we'll be there, and really thankful for the support that you've shown. Yeah.
Arjun, any final thoughts?
I would just echo the same thing, is
Yeah.
that, it's been wonderful to work with you guys.
Yeah.
And, hope it continues
Yes.
for foreseeable future.
We'll make sure it continues, and looking forward to making you all successful. If there are any questions, happy to take a couple of questions for.
Very sorry, but-
Thank you. Don't miss your flight.